Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in amma ba'd. So with the sects, we were studying the sects in Islamic Essentials Book 2, or the lessons that we normally do, and we covered a couple of sects. But today, inshallah, we're going to look at, which is the last one, we're going to look at a Salafi, or Salafiyun, or Salaf, okay? If you want, or Ahlul Salaf. Who are the Ahlul Salaf? That's the question. So, do you consider yourself from Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah and Salaf, following the path of the Salafus Salih? You probably heard of the word Salafis. But sometimes they use it in a negative way, belittling who the Salaf are. Okay, but this is a problem. It's a problem because the correct way is actually the way of the Salaf. And we're going to look at what this word means. Have you guys come across this word? You can type if you want to. And who's curious, who wants to know about? Okay, good. So, if we look at Salafi, what does it mean? Or Salaf? Salaf is like a way, a methodology that people follow, and this calls to the Quran and Sunnah, following the predecessors, okay? Following those who are before you. So the Salaf al-Salih, are the first three generations. The generation of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, then the generation after him, then the generation after him. Because they were the best three generations. Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, خير القرون قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم. So that's exactly what he said. He said, my nation is my century, or my people are the best, the time that I'm living in. The next best is the second one. The next one is the third one. Okay, and you would find most of those who have done great stuff for Islam are in those three groups, three centuries, first 3 centuries. You would see, even if you look at, the hadith books that were written, the madahib, they come under, a lot of them come under those 3 centuries, probably the last century. Okay, until today we're benefiting from their khair. Now, as we understand, it just means, when was this name used, or this word used? Before, there was no need to use it because everybody was following Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, and on the understanding of the Sahaba. But then with these divisions, like we've seen, when the Khawarij came about, we have their own understanding. Then the Mu'tazila came about, or the Shia. Then you had them. You also, alongside that, you had the Mu'tazila, and then you had different groups coming after that. Okay, so especially the time of the people the ulama who are collecting the hadith, they decided we need to also use a name that represents us. Okay, so they started to use this word Salaf. We are following the manhaj of Salaf al-Salih. They had to say, you can use your logic, you can come up with, what the Shia, all these fabricated ideologies and all of that. We are following how the companions were, Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions, and the generation after this. So they refer to this hadith. Okay, so even the ulama, they talk about this. Many scholars, like Ibn Uthaymin rahimahullah, he writes in his book that simply is just the way of following Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companions, by following their understanding as well. So I can't come up with my own understanding, interpret, a hadith and the ayats according to my own logic and say this is what it means and this is about. No, I have to say what the companions understood, how Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam explained it, and if he didn't explain it, how the Sahaba understood it. If they didn't talk about it, at least I look at what they have said first before I come up with anything that is new. So from this we remove the Khawarij, the Mu'tazila, the Qadariyya, Jahmiyya, all these different groups that came about. leave this category because they are not following the Sahaba. Because the Sahaba didn't believe in they didn't believe in these things. They didn't believe what the Shia believed. They didn't believe what the Sufis believed. They didn't believe what the Khawarij believed. Okay, so who amongst the main Imams who really brought out this idea of looking back at the companions, Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam companions, and the generation after them. So some of these four Imams were Sufyan al-Thawri, Al-Layth bin Sa'ad, Ibn Mubarak, Ibrahim al-Nakha'i, Bukhari himself, Muslim, and most of those who wrote the book of Hadith. Most of them, the reason why they were writing the books of Hadith is to say to people, look, we have the Hadith, the authentic Hadith, and the companions' understanding of it, and the ones who also narrating from the companions. So let's follow this. Was the main idea of how the Hadith were compiled. Okay? So it means just taking their path. If I go down. So when it came to arise, especially at the time of the people of Hadith in the 3rd century, and at that time it was very important because the Mu'tazila were in power. Okay, we learned about the Mu'tazila who use logic and philosophy to understand the Quran and Sunnah. They were in power because of the Abbasid era. And during this era also, Ahmad ibn Hanbal was alive. And the four Imams of the Sunnah, Imam Ahmad, Imam Shafi'i, Maliki, and Imam Ahmad and Hanbal, they were all, although Imam Abu Hanifa was before them, but they were alive at that time. Okay, so they were influenced, actually even during Abu Hanifa was close to the Sahaba's time, but he saw this influence as well, and that logic, people were looking at using logic more than the Quran and Sunnah, and people were being influenced, like we saw, by Greek methodology, and they're interacting with the different philosophy, people with different philosophies, different ideas, the Persians and all of that. So it was a very important time to show that we should be following the manhaj of the Salaf, which is the manhaj of those who came before us. Because during that time as well, at the time of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, we talked about the Khalq al-Quran, how they were claiming that the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala were created. So they're using logic in places where you wouldn't need to use logic. And also, during that time, you see, okay, so we can see that people were becoming further away from the Quran and Sunnah. So the idea of Salaf is to go back to the Quran and Sunnah to see what the companions and Sahaba and the Tabi'in, what they said. Ibn Taymiyyah also was one of those who revived this idea. So he was alive in the 7th century, and he was also alive at the Abbasid state, the Abbasid Khalifa that was in Baghdad, and he also witnessed the Tatar, which is where the Muslims were attacked by the Tatar. That was in 656 AH, so 656 years after Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, approximately. So he was known as one of the revivers of the Manhaj al-Salaf. Okay, so he also was someone who was very knowledgeable, and to the extent he knew philosophy and argued with those people who considers philosophy as a way. Okay, so he refuted them in many books. He has one book he refused called Minhaj al-Sunnah al-Nabawiyya, in refuting the Shia. He refused the Shia, and then he had students as well, and he was also called Shaykh al-Islam. So people who followed his ideology and became his students also, and some of them had his ideology, this idea of going back to Quran Sunnah, Al-Dahabi, Ibn Qayyim, Al-Jawzi, Al-Mazi, and many other scholars. Okay, so he was a prominent figure in the Salafi manhaj. Another prominent figure, you probably heard people calling the Salafis, they call them Wahhabi. Okay, you probably heard about Wahhabi, or the name Wahhabi. Is that true? Have you seen people calling, for example, you Wahhabi? And this is, inshallah, what we're going to talk about. And where does this word come from? Muhammad, so it comes from a scholar who was alive in the 18th century. 18th century, okay? So he appeared in Arabia, which is now Saudi Arabia. So Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, who is in Arabia, when he saw, and it was also during the time of the decline of the Ottoman Empire. So the Ottoman Empire was at that time ruling the Muslim world, okay, to an extent where, so there was this spread of, the Sufism and the worship of graves, and even to an extent in the Haram, okay, in Mecca, they would pray 4 salahs, okay. Every madhab used to have their own prayer, their own, they would pray their own times, and they would pray differently, separately, okay. So Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, he saw people who were worshipping the graves and all of that, so he made his mission to call people to Tawheed. Not only that, he worked with one of the leaders at that time, who became the Al Saud, the family of Saud, or this is where the name Saudiya comes from. He worked with this family who wanted also to capture to become leaders of their land, and in a way they were working together to implement this aqeedah as well. So he wasn't looking for power, he was looking to spread the Tawheed, but these other the Al Saud, the family of Saud, were looking to control the lands, and so they can take back. So the Ottomans are basically, they're under the power. It's just like the colonization that you had before all around the world. So they've been colonized, although it's a Muslim lead under Muslim leadership, so it would not be considered as colonization, but they wanted to manage themselves and manage their land with the Tawheed. So he was spreading the Tawheed. So this is Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. He wrote many books, Kitab al-Tawheed, Kashf al-Shubahat. He wrote books of Usul al-Thalatha, which was actually became the curriculum in all around the world for many people who wanted to understand the correct Aqidah. He was a prominent scholar for the Salafi manhaj. So Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said every 100 years there will be a scholar who will revive the Sunnah. So that's why we have these prominent scholars. During our times, in the 2000s, you had Nasir al-Din al-Albani, we already talked about, who was famous for hadith, and he was someone who revived going back to the Sunnah and going back to the manhaj of the Salaf. Similarly, we had Sheikh bin Baz, Abdul Aziz bin Baz, who also is known by people for someone who called people to go back to the manhaj of Salaf al-Salih. They were alive all at the same time. And Sheikh Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, who was also known for calling people to go back to the Quran and Sunnah and reviving. So they were known scholars who were counted as the modern scholars who called for the revival of the manhaj as-Salaf al-Salih. Without going into the small differences that exist between people now, should you call yourself a Salafi or not? Or are there people who practice Salafism, if you want to call it, in different shades? Even the Khawarij started to call themselves Salafi as well, which is a problem. But what I'm saying is, it shouldn't be used, we're going to talk about, as a way to, boycott other people or refute other people. But to know that it's just not a name that you say, I'm Salafi. It doesn't matter if you say I'm Salafi or not. What you have to say is that I'm upon the manhaj, and you have to actually be practicing that manhaj, that methodology. Okay? So this spread out through the Muslim world, and it reached this revival of the correct Aqidah, because you can imagine the Ottoman Empire who are following this Sufi methodology, Aqidah, and they had the Maturidi fiqh, which was not you can say Hanafi fiqh, but the Maturidi Aqidah as well. So they spread this along the Muslim countries although you see many countries coming back, or that came back to the Sunnah and following the the Salaf. Okay, most of them, they call themselves by Ahlul Hadith. Like in Pakistan, a group called Ahlul Hadith in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, Nepal, and they have these names which show that they are different to the other groups that are worshipping graves and all of that. Okay, so like I said, some books in the Aqidah that show us the correct Aqidah, which are written by these scholars. Even Ibn Taymiyyah, he wrote a book called Al-Aqidah Al-Wasitiyya, which is only hadith and ayats. And similarly, Muhammad bin Abdul Wahhab wrote a book, his book called Kitab al-Tawheed. It's only ayat and ahadith, really. So he's just giving us the evidence. And he wrote another small book, which is for beginners, called Usul Thalatha. His Kitab al-Tawheed also has explanations called Fathul Majid. And there's some people who will call you, there's many other books as well. I'm not going to go into all those books. So at the beginning, most of these Aqidah books, they were called like Manhaj al-Sunnah or Usul al-Sunnah. They had these names. But what's important is that who is considered as someone who is following the Salaf. The person who's considered as following the Salaf al-Salih is someone who is actually implementing how the Sahaba were. Not someone who only focuses on pinpointing people's mistakes out, okay, because that's not da'wah, or cutting people off who are Muslim, not giving them salam. No, you give salam to Muslims, you take part in the khair, and you warn them about of the bid'ah, but then again, you don't take them out of, you just don't limit yourself to a small group and say that all these other scholars, we don't take from them. We only take from one or two scholars. Any scholar who's actually following the Aqidah, the correct Aqidah is for Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and he doesn't have bid'ah, you take from him. But you don't just limit yourselves to one or two and say, only those two were taken from those two. This is some of the problems that we have when people say they're Salaf, and we don't want to turn Salaf into another sect where we become divided. So if we make it so limited, we will become divided, because then one sheikh will make a mistake, and then we take him out from Salafiyya, and another one makes a mistake, we take him out from Salafiyya, and then we'll have no sheikhs left. And then we don't work with other people. As long as they're following the Quran and Sunnah, and they say we are on the Manhaj al-Salaf al-Salih, these are scholars also that we should accept. We should take from them. As long as we know by other scholars telling us that they're Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, and they're from the Salaf, and their Aqidah is sound, we take from them. But we shouldn't be suspicious of other people and say, who are you? What are you? Where do you go? What message you pray? And based on that, it becomes like tribalism then. Based on that, you know what he is. No, it's not supposed to be like that. It's supposed to be, when we talk, we should say, the Quran and Sunnah says this. The Hadith says this. The Sahaba understood it as this. This is what we have to start with. Okay? And that is the meaning of Manhaj al-Salaf al-Salih. Wallahu a'lam. But this is just an overview for you to understand. And also, it doesn't mean that we become busy with boycotting people and backbiting scholars. You see now people who call themselves Salaf al-Salih, they would start to say, for example, so-and-so was a kafir. The other day I heard one saying that, Siyad Barra was a kafir, simply just because he heard from other people. But to take someone out of Islam is very dangerous. Whatever he did, but you have to be very careful. Taking someone out of Islam is like making yourself as a judge. Only someone who studied that person's life is able to do that. For example, they would say, even with our Somali scholars, they would say, Sheikh Mustafa, don't take from him, don't take from Sheikh Dirir. They would say, don't take from this Sheikh, this Sheikh now he does this, not this Sheikh now. So they limit you completely to not taking from anybody, or they talk about everybody. So backbiting and refuting other people, the way of the Sahaba and the Salaf was they would actually refute the person, the mistake, rather than the person. The person is a human being, but this mistake or what he said is wrong. Okay, but you don't throw the person away. You correct the person, and a person can make a mistake, and that person can change. But if you just cross out everybody, it's going to be a problem. That's what we have these days. Wallahu alam. Any questions on this?